I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas.
In a move that stunned the world, King Charles delivered a final message to his estranged son, Prince Harry. But what did it contain? For a family that built its legacy on restraint and silence, this was a break from tradition, an unmistakable gesture cloaked in symbolism, subtlety, and quiet finality. No press release, no televised speech, just a private, calculated decision that echoed louder than any royal proclamation. A message not written in ink, but carried out in ceremony, with consequences as deep as the crown's legacy itself. And the world immediately took notice. The message came during what appeared to be a routine royal appointment, a ceremonial handover of a military role. Yet the moment sent shockwaves across media outlets and royal circles. King Charles, fighting a private battle with cancer, chose this moment to hand over command of the Army Air Corps, not to the son who served with distinction in that very regiment, but to his eldest, Prince William. To the public, it may have seemed like business as usual, but to those watching closely, it was anything but. It wasn't just a reshuffling of royal responsibilities, it was a verdict, and it struck like a thunderclap in the stormy silence between father and son. This act, though quiet, rang louder than any confrontation. After years of interviews, memoirs, lawsuits, and confessions, the royal family had reached a boiling point. The public watched as Harry laid bare decades of wounds in his memoir, Spare, accused the institution of emotional neglect, and stepped away from the monarchy entirely. And while many assumed the firm had simply chosen silence as its only defense, King Charles had one last move left. This appointment, made public at a moment when the world was already questioning the king's future due to his health, carried deeper significance. It wasn't just about passing a title, it was about erasing a connection, replacing legacy with absence. Royal commentators were quick to weigh in. Some called it an elegant exclusion, others a devastating blow wrapped in protocol. The timing was surgical. With Charles's own health uncertain, every decision now felt sharpened by urgency. The clock was ticking. And in that ticking came a message Harry couldn't ignore. This wasn't a tabloid rumor or a misinterpreted quote. It was deliberate, royal, final, and it echoed far beyond Buckingham Palace. The deeper meaning? That, even as a father faces his own mortality, some wounds remain too raw to mend. That trust, once broken in public, may not be privately restored. And for Harry, who had spent years pleading not just for recognition, but for protection, for understanding, this felt like the palace closing the gates once and for all. But to understand the weight of this message, we must delve into the origins of this royal divide. Because this wasn't a fracture born overnight. It was a slow, aching unraveling. And it began long before a title changed hands. Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, unveiled the emotional turmoil of living in the shadow of the heir. For decades, the world saw a smiling prince, a soldier, a husband, a royal face among many, but beneath that public image was a man haunted by the invisible weight of his role. The Spare. In those pages, Harry shattered the myth of a perfect palace, life, exposing a world of hierarchy, silence, and emotional exile. It wasn't just a book. It was a rebellion in ink, a son's scream for recognition in a family built on roles, not relationships. And once those words were released, there was no turning back. From the opening lines, Spare stripped away the illusion. The title alone was a gut punch, a lifelong reminder that Harry wasn't born to rule, only to serve as a backup and emergency plan, a human contingency. He spoke of being raised not just as a younger brother, but as a distant second, to a throne he would never touch. His presence was required, his power was not. And that silent truth echoed through every moment of his life, from his school days to the battlefield, from the palace balcony to the back seat of blacked-out cars chasing freedom. In his own words, Harry wasn't nurtured to lead. He was trained to obey. The rawest passages were those about his mother, Princess Diana, the one person who truly saw him, who nurtured the soul behind the smile. Her death shattered more than his childhood. It shattered his compass. Without her, the palace became colder, the rules stricter, and the roles harder to endure. Harry recounted the nightmare of walking behind her coffin in front of the world, a child told to keep his chin up while the weight of grief threatened to suffocate him. That trauma didn't disappear, it evolved. It hardened him, and eventually, it pushed him toward a path the monarchy could never control. But even as Harry navigated pain, he also chased purpose. The military gave him something the palace never could: belonging. In the barracks, there were no titles, no cameras, just brotherhood. Serving in Afghanistan, risking his life in combat, he found pride not in being a prince, but in being useful, earning his stripes, not receiving them. But even that purpose came at a cost. Once his identity leaked, he was pulled from the front lines not for his safety, but for the optics. And again, he was reminded that his life, his choices, would always be decided by the institution, not by his heart. Spare didn't just reveal Harry's story, it ignited a fire. The monarchy, traditionally mute on personal matters, now faced a public reckoning. Critics called it betrayal. Supporters called it bravery. But no one could ignore it. Harry had put everything on the line to tell the truth as he lived it, to reclaim a voice that had long been silenced. And in doing so, he exposed the royal family's deepest cracks. Yet, what came next wasn't just backlash. It was a series of consequences that would redefine the future of the House of Windsor. But the memoir was just the beginning. Actions soon followed that would further widen the royal chasm. Harry's love story with Meghan Markle led to a seismic shift in royal he-how-fee dynamics. It began like a fairy tale, an unexpected spark between a British prince and an American actress. Two worlds colliding in a moment that felt destined. But from the moment Meghan entered his life, the ground beneath the monarchy began to tremble. What seemed like a romantic escape from tradition quickly turned into a global reckoning for the royal family. The institution, polished and rigid, was suddenly facing a force it could neither mold nor muzzle. And Harry, once the rebellious spare, was now fighting for something far more dangerous than freedom. He was fighting for love. Their connection ignited quickly. Whether it began through a blind date or a carefully curated Instagram message, one thing was undeniable: it was real. By the time they appeared together publicly at the 2017 Invictus Games, the message was clear: Harry wasn't just in love, he was all in. The engagement came soon after, and with it, a media frenzy that swung wildly between celebration and condemnation. Some hailed Meghan as a breath of fresh air, a modern woman of color stepping into the heart of Britain's most sacred institution. Others sharpened their knives, dissecting every word, every gesture, every outfit, turning admiration into obsession and joy into fear. As the wedding bells rang on May 19, 2018, millions watched in awe. But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. The couple stood at the altar not only as newlyweds, but as symbols of a monarchy at war with its own evolution. Meghan's presence was a mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about race, privilege, and tradition. The palace smiled on the surface, but behind the walls, old guards whispered. And Harry, once the kingdom's beloved wild card, began to drift even further from the center. The turning point came quietly. In January 2020, Harry and Meghan announced they would step back from their roles as senior royals. It wasn't just about independence, it was about survival. The media's relentless attacks had taken a toll, and the palace's silence spoke volumes. They had pleaded for protection. Instead, they got protocol. In a move that blindsided the establishment, the couple chose exile over obedience. They walked away from titles, duties, and the financial support that came with them, determined to build a life on their own terms. But that choice came at a steep cost. Stripped of security, separated from tradition, and suddenly self-funded, Harry and Meghan found themselves navigating an entirely new world. In California, they began again, not as royalty, but as parents, storytellers, and advocates. Yet the echoes of Windsor followed them. Every interview, every headline, every glance back was a reminder of what they'd left behind and what had been taken from them. But this wasn't just an escape. It was a statement. Their exit was not just a personal choice, but a catalyst for deeper familial fractures. Behind closed doors, Efforts were made to mend the broken royal bonds. The world didn't see the full picture, but whispers leaked through the walls of palaces and private residences. In the aftermath of the Sussexes' explosive departure, when the wounds were still fresh and the headlines relentless, there was still a sliver of hope and opening for reconciliation. It wasn't easy. Pride had already been wounded, and the monarchy, for all its history and power, was still a family first, a fractured one. The first step came after loss. When Prince Philip passed, grief brought them together under the same roof. At Frogmore Cottage, Prince Harry met privately with Prince William, King Charles, and Catherine. No cameras, no press, just raw silence and the weight of everything unsaid. Harry had hoped for more than just formality. But healing doesn't happen on cue. The air was thick with hesitation, every word chosen with care. And though no apologies were exchanged, the fact that they sat down at all was enough to stir rumors. Had the ice finally begun to melt? But reconciliation in the royal world is never straightforward. Months later, Harry made a brief trip to visit Queen Elizabeth, and King Charles happened to be there. What unfolded wasn't explosive, but telling. A 15-minute conversation, polite, measured, but devoid of warmth. The gulf between father and son remained, not just in words, but in what was left unspoken. Charles, still bruised by Harry's public revelations, struggled to understand how his own blood could expose private family pain to the world. And Harry, still hurting from what he perceived as abandonment, found no comfort in protocol. What they needed was a father and son moment. What they had was a diplomatic courtesy. Public events tried to mask the tension. At the Platinum Jubilee, the Sussexes returned briefly. They smiled for the cameras, the crowd cheered, but the seating arrangement spoke volumes. Not front and center, not by the Queen's side, but distant, detached. A subtle reminder that they were guests now, not participants. Even the coronation of King Charles, a historic moment for the monarchy, only deepened the silence. Harry came, alone. No Meghan, no Archie, no Lilibet. He arrived, he watched, he left. Absent from the balcony, excluded from the ceremony's heart. His presence felt like a ghost of a royal past rather than a bridge to the future. Meanwhile, insiders offered carefully worded statements. There's hope. Lines of communication are open. But behind the scenes, the palace was walking a tightrope balancing tradition, public image, and deep personal pain. Some courtiers believed reconciliation was possible. Others feared it would weaken the crown's authority. And in the public eye, every gesture, every smile, every pause was analyzed for signs of either peace or rupture. Still, beneath the tension, something lingered. The memory of what once was. Brothers laughing. A father holding his son. A family whole before duty, and headlines tore them apart. Despite these attempts, new challenges emerged that tested the fragile peace. And this time, they would strike where Harry was most vulnerable: the safety of his own family. Prince Harry's fight for security became a legal saga with profound implications. What began as a private concern exploded into a public standoff that forced the monarchy, the government, and the courts to confront a question that had never been asked before. What protection, if any, is owed to a prince who no longer serves? The crown? For Harry, it wasn't about ego or entitlement, it was about survival. Haunted by the image of his mother's final moments, he refused to let history repeat itself. Not for Meghan, not for Archie, not for Lilibet. But the system he once trusted now stood against him, and the cost of that resistance would reach far beyond personal fear. The battle lines were drawn in early 2020, when Harry and Meghan officially stepped back from royal duties. In doing so, they lost the privilege of state-funded protection. But Harry didn't accept this as just protocol. It was a betrayal. A prince, born into risk, stripped of the very shield that had always surrounded him. Even worse, he wasn't asking for a free pass. He offered to pay for his own security. He pleaded for the right to protect his family on British soil. But the answer was cold, clinical, and final. No. The Royal and VIP Executive Committee, known as RAVEC, concluded that since Harry was no longer performing official duties, he did not qualify for armed protection, even at his own expense. That denial was more than a bureaucratic decision. It was a statement. And Harry responded the only way left to him. He took it to court. The legal proceedings were unprecedented. For the first time, a member of the royal family was suing the government over a matter of personal safety. The documents revealed just how serious the threat was: intelligence reports, targeted online abuse, and the very real danger of public exposure in a country where the press had never forgiven him. Yet, the High Court remained unmoved. In 2023, it upheld the original decision. Harry had no automatic right to security, and the public had no obligation to fund it. He had chosen a new life. The protection stayed with the crown. The royal family remained largely silent, but their silence spoke volumes. To Harry, it was abandonment. To the palace, it was policy. The message was unmistakable. Stepping away meant stepping alone. And while government spokespeople insisted that the decision was based on risk and precedent, Harry saw something deeper: an institutional rejection of his humanity. A willingness to risk his life to preserve tradition. And, for a man already torn between loyalty and pain, it was yet another fracture he couldn't ignore. But the consequences rippled further. Royal observers began questioning the long-standing security protocols that protect the monarchy itself. If a blood-born prince could be denied protection, who else might be next? Was the crown adjusting to modern times, or dismantling its own pillars in the name of order? The case revealed the cold machinery behind royal life, how decisions are made not with heart, but by committee. And as Harry watched the system deny his plea, he realized something devastating. Even legacy can be revoked. Amidst legal battles, personal revelations continued to stir the royal waters. And what Harry said next would shatter illusions the public still clung to. Harry's military service was a defining chapter, now overshadowed by royal decisions. Long before the headlines, before the exodus, before the fractures became public, there was a young man who found purpose not in royal titles, but in combat boots and a flight helmet. For Prince Harry, the military wasn't just an obligation, it was a lifeline. It was in the armed forces that he escaped the suffocating scrutiny of royalty. It was there, in the barracks, and in the skies over Afghanistan, that he became more than the spare. He became a soldier, a leader, a brother, to those who risked everything beside him. But even that sacred part of his identity would eventually be stripped away not by war, but by family. His journey began at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and from there, it was a relentless climb. Harry earned his way, refusing to coast. On his royal name, he served on the front lines, deployed twice to Afghanistan, and later trained as an Apache helicopter pilot. It was in the cockpit, navigating deadly missions, where Harry found clarity. Not once did he seek exemption from danger. Not once did he ask for special treatment. His comrades respected him not for who he was by birth, but for who he proved himself to be in battle. He was one of them. And that brotherhood gave him something the palace never could: equality. The Army Air Corps became his home. The regiment, known for its elite standards and fearless spirit, embraced him. And Harry embraced it right back. His dedication earned him the prestigious title of Captain Wales, and in 2013, he qualified as an Apache aircraft commander, no small feat. The image of a prince, helmeted and hardened, flying into active war zones, stood in stark contrast to the ceremonial pageantry the world had come to expect from Windsor. In the military, Harry didn't have to perform. He belonged. But when Harry stepped back from his royal duties, that bond was quietly broken. One by one, the honorary military titles he held so dearly were removed. Among them, the title of Captain, General of the Royal Marines, a position once held by his grandfather, Prince Philip. The most personal blow came when King Charles, in a calculated and symbolic move, reassigned the role of Colonel-in-Chief of the Army Air Corps. The very regiment Harry had risked his life with was now under the command of Prince William. To the world, it was royal restructuring. To Harry, it was a deeply personal erasure. The fallout was immediate. Veterans voiced disappointment, many believing that Harry had earned his titles in blood and dust, not through inheritance. Online forums, filled with messages of respect, frustration, and heartbreak. Some questioned why a man who had given so much to his country was being dismissed so easily. Others saw it as the inevitable price of leaving the royal fold. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just about military uniforms. It was about identity, about dignity, about the last link between the life Harry had built and the institution he had left behind. And so, with every stripped title and reassigned honor, the message grew louder. The royal family was moving on. As roles shifted, so did the dynamics within the royal hierarchy. And Harry, once a decorated soldier and royal ambassador, now found himself outside the system he once served, watching the reshaping of a legacy he helped defend. King Charles's health scare prompted a reevaluation of personal and familial priorities. For a man who had spent a lifetime preparing to reign, the throne had barely warmed beneath him before the weight of mortality forced its way in. In January 2024, the palace broke its carefully polished silence to confirm what many had quietly feared: Charles had been diagnosed with cancer. It wasn't prostate-related, as initially suggested. It was something far more serious. The kind of diagnosis that shifts power structures, rattles tradition, and exposes the human fragility behind royal marble. For the public, the announcement came with composed language, curated phrases, and a pledge to carry on duties where possible. But behind palace doors, reality hit differently. Treatments began immediately, and for the first time in decades, the crown was no longer invincible. Charles, the monarch who had waited longer than any in British history to ascend, now faced a race not for legacy, but for time. Public appearances dwindled. Official engagements were quietly reassigned, and the ceremonial machine of the monarchy creaked as its center faltered. But it wasn't just state matters that shifted. Inside the royal family, the diagnosis forced a reckoning no protocol could delay. The once unshakable image of the king was replaced by something more vulnerable: Charles, as a father, frail and finite. Queen Camilla stepped into the spotlight, with grace, taking on a heavier load, shielding both the institution and her husband. Prince William took on more public responsibility, positioning himself as the inevitable heir, the future already moving forward. Yet amid this rearrangement, eyes turned to someone far from the palace gates: Harry, the estranged son, the outsider. The news of his father's illness reached him thousands of miles away in California. But it didn't take long for the impact to sink in. For all the public tension, for all the legal battles and emotional distance, this wasn't about the monarchy anymore. This was about blood. About a son facing the possibility of losing his father before ever finding resolution. According to sources close to the Sussex camp, Harry was deeply shaken. Suddenly, every decision from the memoir to the interviews to the lawsuits felt heavier, more final. Because what if time ran out before forgiveness was found? Yet even then, the walls between them held firm. There were no immediate visits, no tearful reunions, only private messages, quiet inquiries, and lingering hesitation. Harry expressed his concern, but the road back was still steep. Charles, despite everything, had not extended a public olive branch. Perhaps he was waiting for the right moment. Or perhaps the wounds ran deeper than even illness could reach. But something had undeniably shifted. The royal family, often defined by its stoicism, was being forced to feel, forced to confront that even crowns can't outlive time. The public watched closely. Would crisis become the bridge that healed the divide? Or would it be yet another missed moment in a saga already marked by silence? One thing was certain: when health falters, the illusions of power crumble, leaving only the truth between people. And in the face of mortality, the question remains: can fractured bonds be restored? With the past behind and the future uncertain, the royal family stands at a crossroads. What once felt like a steady institution rooted in centuries of ritual and rule now feels fragile, human, and unpredictable. At the center of this new royal reckoning is Prince Harry, a man caught between legacy and liberation, memory and movement. His decision to break away from the monarchy rewrote the narrative for a new generation. But the final chapter is far from over. Despite the speeches, the lawsuits, the memoir, and the painful silences, one question still hangs in the air: can this family truly find their way back? As it stands now, the relationship between Harry and the monarchy is suspended in ambiguity. Communication exists, but it's cautious, filtered, guarded. There have been no grand reunions, no redemptive photo ops, just the occasional shared glance at events or the exchange of polite, distant words. The coronation made that painfully clear. Harry arrived alone, departed alone, and sat visibly apart from the royal core. His presence was acknowledged but never embraced. A symbol, perhaps, of the line that still divides blood from institution. And yet, both sides seem to understand that something must eventually give. Time, after all, is not on their side. Public opinion remains sharply divided. Some see Harry as a brave reformer, a man willing to sacrifice comfort and crown for the truth. Others view him as a traitor to his lineage, a figure who aired private wounds for global applause. Meghan, too, remains a lightning rod, praised and vilified in equal measure. But love them or hate them, no one can deny the impact they've had. The royal family is no longer just a symbol of tradition. It's become a mirror reflecting deeper questions about race, class, trauma, and transparency. And whether the monarchy evolves or resists, the world is now watching with clearer eyes. Harry and Meghan, for their part, have made their position clear. They're building a life outside. The shadow of the crown focused on their children, their causes, and their version of peace. In interviews and statements, they've emphasized healing, not revenge. Their tone has softened in recent months, but the boundaries remain intact. They aren't asking to return. They're asking to be heard, respected, and left to define their own legacy. The palace, so far, has responded mostly with silence, a strategy that has preserved the institution's mystique, but done little to rebuild trust. And now, the monarchy itself stands at a turning point. With King Charles battling illness and Prince William preparing for the weight of the crown, the future of the institution may depend on how it confronts its past. Will it continue to preserve image at the cost of family? Or will it find the courage to admit that even royals can break and still be rebuilt? The next steps are not ceremonial. They're personal, vulnerable, historic. As the world watches, only time will tell if healing is possible for this royal family. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.